Good afternoon. I'm Wren Wescoatt. Actually, this is a good segue. I was raised on Molokai and now live on Oahu with my family. And I've been working in renewable energy for about 17 years for a few different companies. Now I am VP of Development for Longroad Energy, and we develop utility scale projects around the country, and my kuleana is Hawaii. Panelists, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure, thank you, Wren. Aloha, everyone. Nicola Park, Director of Hawaii for Clearway Energy. Just really honored to be here today. Been working alongside Wren and Kirstin for many, many years now. Just feels like this conference is coming at a really critical time when it's pretty tough to be a developer these days. So I think we all need this to reignite the passion that we have for the great work that we're doing. Just a quick background on Clearway. Clearway is the 5th largest developer of renewable energy in the country. We operate just over 9 gigawatts of solar, wind, and battery storage assets across 26 states. In just a very short time, just under a decade, Clearway had brought online 110 megawatts across 3 projects on Oahu. More recently, we brought online 2 of the first utility-scale battery storage projects on Oahu, along with 2 projects. And more recently, we're awarded 3 projects out of the Stage 3 procurement that total over a gigawatt hour of storage and 200 megawatts of solar. Clearway did withdraw from PPA negotiations on those projects in October, but we are looking forward to advancing those projects for future PPA opportunities. So overall, just really proud to be representing the great team that Clearway has operationally on the ground and across the country supporting the development work that we do.
Thank you, Nicola. I'd also like to, looking across the audience here, my name is Kirstin Punu. I am from Maui, and I recently moved home here to Maui, so I'm based here on this island. I am actually Director of Project Origination for AES Hawaii. The Director of Hawaii Project Development is in the room here. I'll give a shout out a little bit later, but I wanted to start maybe to just get can you raise your hand if you are not from Hawaii and you are here as a visitor? Okay. Great, wonderful. I know we're throwing around a lot of acronyms. You know, you did come to the Hawaii Energy Conference, but you know, if there's anything you know that we're talking about and context, you know, please feel free to put a question in the chat. Yeah, AES Hawaii is you know is a development arm of the AES Corporation, which is a global energy company here in Hawaii. We've been operating projects for over 30 years. We have over 50 employees here in the state of Hawaii, you know, who live and work here, and many, many more across the country that support our projects here in Hawaii. We'll talk a little bit more about our business models, but yeah, we kind of are what we consider a cradle-to-grave renewable energy provider from project origination all the way to operations and maintenance. Let's see, we also were awarded we have over a dozen projects here in the islands, on Maui, Hawaii Island, and Kauai that are, you know, utility scale solar plus storage, wind that are either in operation or are in development. We were awarded 2 projects as part of the Stage 3 Hawaiian Electric Company RFP, and yep, we are moving forward with those projects. I believe Shelley mentioned in this morning's panel that, you know, we're still under negotiation with those projects. So yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you all.
And since most of you are from Hawaii, I thought I would do a quick pidgin English recap of the day so far. First, we had the mayor. Make sure we get enough for everybody. Wise words. Then we had the first panel. 100% can or no can? LNG? Give them. Then we had the second panel. Nobody liked the grid catch fire. Then we had the third panel. Ask the community first or you're going to catch cracks. Plus, Ted going to put PV on Joe's condo, I guess. So now you're caught up. While we were outside at the snack session beforehand, the oatmeal cookies are awesome. And I was about to reach for one of those small ones, you know, with the powdered sugar. But I didn't want to like come here with like a little powdered sugar under my nose and people be like, oh, getting pepped up for the afternoon session. So, first of all, utility scale development, for those, we all do the same thing. We develop utility scale projects, which means with that process, we find land for projects that we think could work for solar. We negotiate with landowners, discuss the project with community stakeholders. We pitch the project to Hawaiian Electric or other utility and negotiate with them. We bid a set price. We negotiate a contract for wholesale. We wholesale the electricity basically to the utility. We conduct the studies, get the permits, engineer the project, secure the financing, buy the equipment, and then build, test, and commission the project. The process usually, if everything goes well, it should take 3 or 4 years to get through that process for solar. That's if nothing changes. The problem is, it always changes. Something unexpected always happens, and it usually, you know, is bad for the project. Nicola mentioned they had to withdraw 2 projects from this stage 3 RFP. I had to withdraw 2 projects in the stage 2 RFP. Kirstin, have you had to withdraw any projects yet? Okay, awesome. Okay, we're all in the same boat. I was going to say, I invited her to this panel. She might get kicked off the panel if she hasn't had unpleasant results. And so we really sort of wanted to talk today. I mean, the panel, this is about finding solutions. So we wanted to quickly complain about the problems and then talk about potential solutions. So just not complain, but identify what are the unexpected, where there's so many unexpected things that happened. They're sort of surprising, horrible for the project, usually external, something that we didn't cause is some external thing, and that it's sort of terminable, right? Could, so SHET, SHET that happens, we'll call that a new acronym. So Nicola, what is the kind of SHET that happens to projects?
Oh my gosh, thanks for that, Wren.
It's an industry term. Jonathan can tell you, they use it in Colorado.
Yeah, I think it is. It's like Murphy's Law. Everything that could go wrong has gone wrong at some point for these projects. There's been a lot of ups and downs, and I guess there's a quote that if there's one thing that's certain in business, it's uncertainty. I think we have all had a healthy dose of that, but really it is how we confront that uncertainty and prepare for it and mitigate it as an industry that I think really determines whether we're going to achieve our goals and have achieved our goals. There's been definitely some big unexpecteds that we've all experienced, of course, with COVID. 5 years ago, none of us could have anticipated that, and then the resulting global supply chain instability and inflation that we saw. Really, we all became experts in force majeure provisions and negotiations and purchase orders with suppliers and working closely with our suppliers and partners. You know, Clearway was able to bring online the first stage 1 project just before the coal plant closure, working closely with our partners like Moss and our suppliers to get that done. But there were really a lot of challenges. We saw price increases. That price was a 3% increase to accelerate that, but every single PPA in those procurements saw increases up to, I think the maximum was 56% increase in price to get those projects to be able to move forward. And that was across the industry. That wasn't Hawaii specific. We really saw that across the industry as a really tough trend that we were all working around. More recently, of course, we have the great uncertainty around the Trump tariffs that are still very uncertain. Things are changing every single day. We're looking at procurement of things like domestic content for batteries that were finally coming down on cost. And now we're seeing that there's inputs there that have tariffs. So really a lot of uncertainty there, of course, that we're all confronting. And then, of course, more recently as well with the potential phase down of ITC, PTC credits. And I think it's still very early in that process through Congress. And so we're still cautiously optimistic, but it looks like at the very least there will be phase out of tax credits through 2031. So lots there. There's many more things, but I'll leave it there, Kirstin, for you.
Yeah, beautiful. Nicola named a lot of them. I'll take us maybe back a step, and I think the slide that Leilani showed with the graphic representation of the development process as understood by the community, again, was just beautiful and brilliant and really kind of segued us really nicely into this discussion of development is hard. All development is hard, especially here in Hawaii, where we have this unique kind of situation of very, very constrained land and multiple needs that we need to meet, multiple challenges, trying to be kind of a self-sustaining system, here in Hawaii, and then having this deep, deep love and respect for our aina, for our land, and wanting to go slow to go fast, right? But I think our panel this morning really set the stage quite nicely by saying, like, we've been talking about this for a very long time and bringing solutions to the table. Now it's time for action. I had written down a note here that says, we're in like with all of these layers of challenges with development. We have added technical complexities here in Hawaii. We're clearly tip of the spear. The technology required, the technology and operational capabilities of the plants that we're designing. And for those of you who aren't, utility scale by definition here for our utilities is 5 megawatts and greater, right? So and paired solar must be paired with storage. So, the types of plants and the operational capabilities are very some I believe have said like first of their kind, right? So we're facing these very unique land use, considerations, permitting, entitlements, environmental concerns, community. We heard Leilani's list of cultural, archaeological considerations, compiled with high technical, deep, innovative technical requirements, and then we've got the layer of just times of uncertainty, right? Times of great uncertainty. So I wrote down here, we've come a very long way in the past 10, 15 years in terms of education and building trust. And Commissioner Asuncion this morning said, let's take that a step further and say education plus commitment, right? So I know I'm not answering the question, Wren, but I wanted to set the stage for the rest of this discussion by maybe challenging everyone in the audience to listen to all the solutions that we're presenting here today, and then take home one commitment that you, your group, and your organization can commit to in order to everyone carry a little pebble and get us there.
So if we think about unexpected problems that pop up for projects, and it's not just, I'm thinking in terms of, I often think in terms of cost. Like this tariff now changes our equipment costs, it raises our equipment costs by 13%, or if the tax credit goes away, it raises our cost by 30%. Those sort of big needle movers on cost. But if we think about the process we have to go through negotiating, after projects are selected, if you're here in this morning's session, Rick Rocheleau put up a slide with a whole bunch of projects in red. These were all projects that were selected in RFP process, and all the ones in red didn't make it. It was carnage. It was the terrifying slide. I had to leave the room. But that's kind of what we're talking about. So how, and some of those developers are not going to come back, right? So the market we have for utility scale development, we're losing developers because it's difficult it's so difficult to get projects done. So I guess I would ask first, what are some of the things that we can do to help projects get from selection to successful completion? What are changes we can make at the process, or what are some potential solutions we could try?
Yeah, very good question, and important to focus on solutions. I think the big thing to remember with these projects is that they just take a very long time to develop, to get to construction, I've been here 13 years developing utility scale projects, and it took 10 years to get one utility scale solar project done. And there are projects that will take longer, I'm sure. And so in thinking about the solutions, we always have to keep in mind these very long time horizons, not only of development, but then the operations period. We're locking in 20-year plus pricing at fixed pricing when all of these inputs, inflation and many variables are moving all over, right? Great uncertainty. So I think, those solutions really have to take that into account. I mean, I think a very obvious one that we also saw play out with COVID and the pricing amendments is just having some flexibility in price. We have to acknowledge that there is a high level of uncertainty and prices could go up and down based on the pass-through of some of those costs. So waiting to file pricing amendments when these unexpected things occur, we could look at that in a more proactive way. And certainly with tariffs and ITC phase out, that's certainly going to be an approach that I think we should be looking at seriously. And I know that was in HECO's statement of position for the integrated grid planning RFP. Is something that they would be looking at. It's certainly something that we're seeing a precedent for as well. The PUC of Colorado recently approved a pricing amendment for tariff and ITC risk for a PPA, with some caps, with independent auditor involvement to verify that kind of movement. And then also with the ability to change that up to 18 months before commercial operations or later, depending on policy changes. So I think that's the type of thing that we're going to start to see across the country to get these projects through to construction, so we don't see this type of attrition from the time they sign PPAs to construction.
Yeah, concur very much, very strongly. I think, again, the lost opportunity cost of having projects not come to fruition, right? Get so far down that development process, go through the system studies, the impact analysis, talk to the communities, have landowners that you've committed with, again, you're in Leilani's kind of like red line and beyond, it's really, there's an impact. It's not just a shame. There's an economic impact, and that economic impact is borne, the burden of that is borne by ratepayers ultimately, right? As reflected in the either increased pricing that a developer will come back to if they have to withdraw their project and then effectively almost start over. I mean, a study, a cultural archaeological study needs to be refreshed, and it should be, right? So, if you're canceling your project and then you're trying to bid it back in 2-3 years later, there's an opportunity cost there, and that does ultimately get borne by the ratepayer. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, in the olden times, 2020, 2019, when we bid projects into the Hawaiian Electric RFP, we bid, this is the price, and you then negotiate the PPA, and then the PUC approves, and then you build the project, and all throughout that time, thou shalt not change the price, right? That has to stay the price that you bid. But then we started having these external, with the supply chain crisis, right? We're seeing more and more of these sort of external factors that make such a big impact that no developer can, the only choice is to cancel the project. I mean, the price increase to purchase batteries, during the supply chain crisis and ship them here was just astronomical. For one project, we had a $90 million increase in the cost of the project. So we canceled the project. And I think that's what we're looking to solve, right? Is that the only solution, where the project has to be terminated and you have to start all over in the next RFP? So now that we have a new federal administration that is taking the changes that are being made in policy that have a dramatic effect on the renewable energy industry, and I'm not even mentioning offshore wind, which different sectors are affected more or less, but even just take the tariffs and the ITC and some of the approvals, it's so much harder and more expensive. So I will ask you, if the project, at what point do you say, do we pause until there's a new administration, or do we keep pushing forward?
Yeah, really great question. And we've definitely seen projects nationally that have stalled because they are waiting to see the outcome of some of these things. I think one of the solutions, going back to solutions, that we can focus on the things that we control here locally and within as a state. There is a lot that we're not going to be able to have an influence on federally, and so focusing on things that are within our control, that we can address at the state level through legislation and sort of the great collaboration that we saw through this legislative session to find solutions, and things like interconnection cost, right? Where we actually, as an industry utility commission can really come together and look at other solutions for that. For a long time, we've been kind of advocating for a pass-through of some of those costs to say these are costs that have a level of uncertainty with them, right? And there have been projects on that list of red that saw attrition because of risks around interconnection costs. So I think really focusing back on what we can do here as a state and an industry is a good way to confront those challenges, as well as the things we were talking about, a certain level of price flexibility. But certainly we shouldn't hold back on pursuing our goals. We really need to forge forward probably faster than ever, especially if the phase down is as aggressive as it looks like it may be on ITC. That really gives us all even renewed urgency to fast track permitting and interconnection and these types of things to see these projects come online sooner and get the maximum benefit of federal dollars for clean energy.
Yeah, absolutely, Nicola. Again, the kind of gentle reminder that renewables are part of the solution of these unknown unknowns. Like it's almost as if the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative and foresaw all of the incredible uncertainty that we would be facing, right? Supply chain risks, international conflict, right? We heard Shelley talk this morning about like them pivoting where they're getting their fuel from, and that was the whole point behind the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative and the 100% renewable energy goal, which is still in place here in our state. So I agree wholeheartedly with focusing and doubling down on our commitment, on our state's commitment. We were the first state out the gate to make that commitment, and for good reason, right? Reminding ourselves why we did that. Here locally, I agree also. We agree a lot. We all seem to agree a lot. Focusing on the I have these two categories of risks here in project management: unknown unknowns, which we've talked a lot about, and then the known unknowns, which Nicola, I think you touched on, right? And these are the low-hanging fruit that we can focus on that will make the greatest impact, most immediately. And that kind of goes back to my call to action to all of us here who are operating in the Hawaii space, right? Is yes, interconnection reform, allowing for flexibility and price adjustments so we can keep projects moving forward. We haven't touched on land use policy and legislation. Again, our state has these incredibly lofty goals, and our land use policy really needs to come together to align with meeting those goals. And that's a challenge in and of itself, because land use policy, again, has a lot of other conflicting, needs as well. So
I'm glad you mentioned land use policy. So a lot of the discussion around land use comes back to agriculture, because as Commissioner mentioned this morning, the chair mentioned this morning, solar and farming like the same kind of land, flat, sunny land with dirt. So I think there's a lot of concern that agriculture and solar are competing for the same land, and folks on the ag side are worried that, well, solar is taking the best farmland. So, we have, talk to us about agrivoltaics. I know there's some research being done in Mililani on how do you find ways to grow crops between and under solar panels.
What a great question, Wren. Such a great question. So we actually have all hooied up our collective resources to support some really great research in agrivoltaics. Thanks to your leadership, Wren, and Clearway has been honored to be the site of the agrivoltaic demonstration project that we've all funded. It's been really exciting to see the great outcomes of that research. Hawaii Agricultural Research Center actually performs the research. It's been several years now, 3 years in running, of great work. We have 2 phases of the project. We welcome you all to come out. We've done so many tours. Probably half of you have already been there at this point. But really, it's a great example of the potential for the dual use of land that we have, especially on Oahu, where we have a lot of constraints in finding additional sites. We're increasingly constrained on the type of sites that where we can locate these projects, and there's a lot of win-win-win sort of scenarios. Chair Asuncion also mentioned affordable housing. It's certainly something for our state lands that we should be looking at doing, bringing all 3 of these things together in some of these sites.
Yeah, I'll maybe play a little bit of bad cop also. I want to make it very, very clear. Not every site is suitable for compatible agricultural use, right? So when we talk about the iron triangle of scope, schedule, budget, you all knew I was going to talk about the iron triangle if you've ever heard me get on the stage before, right? There are some cases where it's going to make great sense, and I think that's what the impetus behind the research is. When it makes sense, what is within the realm of possibility. There are some cases where it will not make sense, and that will help, to keep prices lower. Every time you add an additional restriction, or I don't want to call it a restriction, an additional requirement into an already very complex project, there is an impact, right? So I just want to play a little bit of devil's advocate there, but the research is really fantastic, and I am an absolute nerd for data-based policy, and so yeah, I'd encourage you all to check it out.
Yeah, they've gone through about 40 different crop trials, growing things under panels. So they're getting shade throughout the day. But some plants, the Swiss chard is like this big. I mean, some of the plants are very successful. And so we're hoping, in future projects that are compatible, on better ag land with irrigation, we can grow. We have one project where we have a hydroponic lettuce farmer that's going to farm between the rows, and we're hoping to, increase that. And I think we will at other projects, because we're using agricultural land, and we don't want to take ag land out of production if it's useful, good ag land. So we want, we're hoping that in the future, more and more projects can combine agriculture with solar, not just for grazing, but for farming as well.
In that specific case, did you come to that conclusion through your discussions with the community? Was that?
What about in the community? Well, certainly in talking with the community, I think people that we bring out to the site that see the ag under the solar, it is so much, you get a much better reaction from people. Solar panels by themselves aren't super attractive, ground mounted. I'm not dissing on the rooftop. Those look awesome.
I disagree.
But the ground mounted solar,
I disagree.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying I respectfully disagree with you. I think there can be multiple opinions about the aesthetics of utility scale solar.
That's right.
I, for one,
they look awesome.
think that for all of you who flew into the island of Maui, if you were lucky enough to sit on the left-hand side of the plane, unless it was Kona winds, I wasn't, but you could see our Kuihelani solar project. And from the air, I find it quite beautiful. I hear people talking all the time about, they can't tell. They're like, is that crops? What is that?
Actually, I think they're talking about Kahiava wind, which I developed, not your solar project. It's great we're all smiling up here. We really can't stand each other in real life.
Only when you're stealing the land.
Okay.
Well, actually, that's a beautiful segue. May I? Site selection, landowner appetite. We had a discussion on wildfire mitigation and wildfire considerations this afternoon as well, or this morning as well, if you all were in the room. And this is another kind of unknown in terms of risks, because that is what this panel is about, is it not? Yeah, solutions. Okay. Landowner appetite, and we need land. and we don't always purchase land outright. We have various forms of site control. Our landowner partners are incredibly important, and I think, you know, if I may kind of identify some solutions here, is I know there are some, you know, landowners, institutional landowners, and organizational representatives for organizations that own a lot of land here. You know, the appetite for working together with us, the utility scale developers, and the utility to get comfortable with these projects being sited on your land long term, and to kind of the educational process that these projects are not part of the problem, they are part of the solution, right? In many cases, we're upgrading, we're providing what Hawaiian Electric Company has identified as necessary grid modernization, putting in new infrastructure with the most modern design, and we're, you know, again, directly contributing to the shutdown or the timely phasing out of older, less efficient generation resources, right? We are actively now managing land and creating fire breaks and vegetation management on hundreds of acres that in many cases is fallow, is not being used for active agriculture. So, you know, again, these partnerships with landowners and getting landowners comfortable as being part of the solution, I think, is also one really low, you know, it's a piece of low-hanging fruit that we can get started on today.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wasn't sure if you're going to add to that.
I was thinking about adding to that. Yeah, I mean, I think another important thing to remember, and your point is spot on. The landowner partners that we have on these projects are absolutely critical. And I think there's an assumption that these sites will just continue to be available for renewable energy. And I think we all as an industry have to have a little bit of sense of urgency around the fact that there are many competing uses for land in Hawaii. This land is very valuable. There are a lot of other alternatives that these landowners could pursue. And when projects continue to get pushed out 3, 4, 5 years, it's completely reasonable for them to expect higher option payments, higher lease rates. They keep deferring other alternatives they have for their land, and that we really can't forget and take that as a foregone conclusion that these sites that are in the red list are going to keep coming back as renewable energy sites.
And if farmers are concerned that land is going to be taken by utility scale solar developers are concerned that land's going to be taken for housing. Good solar land's going to be taken for housing because landowners can make so much more, right? Thinking about land use, you know, other types of land uses and other kinds of challenges we face. Are there? I was blanking on my question. No, let's go to interconnection. I don't want to lose that one. What are some potential solutions to? I think what happens when we develop projects is developers estimate how much we think the interconnection cost is going to be, what's going to be involved and how much it will cost. And then we include that in our proposal as part of our part of the cost that we're paying for. And then later on throughout the process, the utility could tell us that after further study, it looks like the interconnection cost is going to be higher. And normally developers are responsible to pay whatever that difference is. So that can often put pressure, financial pressure on a project. So what are some potential solutions to that? Or what are some ways we might look at fixing that situation?
Yeah. I do so much better when someone else goes first. Well, I think going back to the high level, like certainty increases project viability, which then increases the ability of the project to bring all of the good things that it brings.
That's right. And I'm just going to stop you there because it's not, I oversimplified. It's not just the cost increases, it's that we don't know what's going to happen with interconnection. And so do we spend, money to buy a transformer like 3 years ahead if we don't know what that interconnection cost is going to be, right? It's hard to spend money to keep the project going if you're uncertain. Resume.
Sure, exactly. So certainty from the technical aspect, or the technical perspective, certainty from the cost perspective. So interconnection in and of itself, I feel like we could have a whole symposium on interconnection alone, right? Let me approach the kind of like cost aspect of this. You know, similar to the unknown unknowns in terms of tariffs and repeal of the IRA, we need to understand that there is some equitability in the contracting process, right? When we bid, like as Wren says, we bid a fixed firm price. I think the original intent of that, I know the original intent was to keep costs low for all ratepayers, and have the developer bear the risk. But as we've seen, that this is causing a very, very high level of attrition. We submitted some very, very similar comments. One solution to this may be that we just accept this is an unknown unknown, and we remove it from the kind of competitive bidding process, right? And we say, okay, Hawaiian Electric Company will select a project based on the merits of the project, based on the benefits or based on what the project can deliver, what the project can do for the grid, all of the things that it assesses us on, and based on the cost that we believe we can bring the project to fruition in the time that we can do it. And then the interconnection process is a whole separate process, and we are, there's either a shared cost component or there's an actual cost price true up kind of before you reach COD, or perhaps before, some milestone before you sign a PPA or something of the like, right? So that could help to create certainty in the process.
I think there's also some real opportunities there to then speed up the process. So the IRS, the interconnection requirement study, is composed of the system impact study and then the facility study that determines the cost and schedule. And so I think if we start to pull that out, tease that out again from the competitive process, and sort of take a step back and say, there's already been these wholesale island-wide hosting capacity analyses that have been done as to how much can be injected at any one location. Largely, the system impact study is not determining then these costs, and so we can start to put a bounds around it and say, this is a P50 or P80 estimate as we go through the process. There's a certain bounds of where that PPA rate is going to end up as a result of this, and that there's actually a true-up. Again, it could be lower than anticipated. And so instead what's happening is we're embedding the risk in an anticipated contingency that then doesn't get passed on as a benefit to the ratepayer. So it goes both ways. It's not always these things pushing prices up. There's also an opportunity to bring that cost down as a pass-through to ratepayers, and also to speed up the process.
I went to look at a proposed wind project in American Samoa, and we were evaluating it to see if we wanted to purchase it from the developer. This is a few years ago, and it was actually right at the start of COVID. Yeah, because I remember they were checking my temperature as I got off the plane, but nobody had masks on. It was 2020, like February, and I asked, as part of my diligence, I met with the utility. I asked them to see the power purchase agreement, which the developer had signed. So he pushes across, I don't know, maybe 10 pages stapled. And I was like, the whole thing. He said, that is the whole thing. A 10-page power purchase agreement. And like on page 1, it says, the utility will purchase your power. Page 2 says the seller will sell you the power, and this is the rate we propose, subject to the following adjustments. And there was a little table of about, I want to say 6 lines that had the variables that they hadn't quite studied all the way, right? They were estimating the wind was going to be this much, and if the wind was this much to this much, there was a range at which the price would change. And so they had adjustment factors they had tax credits, they had interconnection costs, all the things were just listed in a little table. And, from this low price to this high price, it would adjust this much by some factor. And I thought, that's sort of what when I think about a mechanism for flexibility, it's sort of, we can't put in the stuff we don't know, right? But we can look at the stuff we do know, the things we've seen recently, and agree to some sort of adjusters so that, this is the price we're proposing, or the tax credit we're proposing. If it goes down, it adjusts by this much. If it goes up, it adjusts by this much. So the price to the utility could go down in some cases or could go higher to some limits. So that's sort of like a mechanism that I would envision that would be very helpful in terms of, how do you take all that uncertainty and make it so that it's a two-way street? I mean, there's not, the developer's not just trying to take upside. I think we're really just trying to make sure the project succeeds. We'll keep our economics the same, right? Keep our profit the same, and let's be able to adjust up or down so it doesn't kill the project. And if it does go down, if prices go down, tax credits go down. I mean, the tariff went from 145% to 30% on Chinese stuff 2 weeks ago. So that, that's an increase, right? So that the ratepayer, it's a win for the ratepayer. So there could be ways to build in that type of flexibility. Other than cost changes, I say, smoothly quoting an audience question, how much of the risk impact is associated with site acquisition and control? And would HECO hosting a site allow developers to compete on pricing and help address some of the uncertainties?
It's like someone was reading my notes. So this is a model. Okay, let me start with, what was the first part of the question? How much is site control is risk? I mean,
yeah,
it's
site acquisition and control. You may include associated easements.
all of it. I mean, all of it. You can't build a project without site control. You can't build a Gentai line without site control. That's the first step. It's always the first step in the project process, and it's a very, very key and important step, right? I loved, again, Leilani, where are you? I'm sorry, I'm stealing all your slides. I should have just left them up here. I thought she did the CRAP process did a beautiful job at, so we have our, I'm going to go off on a tangent here. I'm trying not to go off on a tangent. They took their res zones, they took their renewable energy zones that communities said, it's okay, put it here, put it there. And they overlaid the technical capabilities, the interconnection points, the points that were going to result in potentially the lowest cost and difficulty to interconnect, right? And that was a really great. What I would have really loved to have seen is, are there willing landowners? Because that's also a very, obviously, the most critical step. Are there willing landowners? And then what is the cost of that land? For those of you who don't know, Kauai Island Utility Cooperative, I'll give a shout out to them too. This is their model, right? So they'll go out and they'll proactively say, I don't know this to be true, but I assume they'll go out and they'll say, this is where we have needs. This is where we have grid needs. And of course they're sophisticated. They understand this is where the resource is as well. And so they offer sites. They have proactive conversations with landowners. Is that the only way to do it? No, but there could be a case where, yes, if Hawaiian Electric Company identified a key location, like Keamuku switchyard on the island of Hawaii, where they identified this is a critical piece of infrastructure, and we want to upgrade this infrastructure in the future, in the very near future. Is there an opportunity for cost share? And they identified that site specifically in their last RFP, and we proposed a project that did just that, and it was one of our awarded projects in stage 3. Did I answer that question, hopefully?
Yeah, I think that was good. Yeah, and Hawaiian Electric has done that in a few places as well in their past RFPs, identifying a site, and it does. It changes things. I think part of the developer DNA, perhaps I'm just speaking for myself, but it's sort of like, that kind of, I'm going to get creative and go find this place over here or that place over here. And the problem is, then it still has to work for the utility, right, at some point. And one of the limits we're coming up to is transmission, right? Is how much, where is their transmission, right? Often you have a good site, but if it's not near the project, you have to have a generation lead or a transmission line built? And does the existing transmission, even if it's right nearby, what's the capacity on that? So what are some potential solutions to the limited transmission capacity?
I don't have a great answer to that, Wren, but I will say that there have been new standards as well that it's important to mention in terms of reliability and redundancy. As developers, we hear N-1, and we get a little concerned as to what that might entail. But it is important to remember that a lot of times this infrastructure is beyond just what would be absolutely critical to just connect a project to transmission line. A lot of times it's more big picture, island-wide transmission congestion, Kiamuku being a perfect example of that as well. And so these upgrades are, in many instances, beyond just what would be needed for the project, but are actually providing a lot more in terms of resiliency, redundancy, and grid operation. So I think, again, it goes back to what we were talking about in terms of interconnection cost and process improvements.
Couple other questions from the audience. Good questions. Would it make sense to reduce the 5 megawatt land use requirement? I think that's I guess it's a minimum for utility scale energy. And I think I think the question is probably related to, I guess 5 megawatts is sort of the minimum for the RFP process.
I mean, that's probably not all that relevant to the IPPs that are sitting here today. I think, if anything, what we've seen is a trend towards larger projects, and maybe it's a good segue to talk about the fact that we have seen an attrition of IPPs in Hawaii. There's probably, half a dozen we could rattle off the top of our heads that have come to Hawaii, plan to invest, develop projects, and then have either not had a single project succeed or have left or have no plans to return. So it's important that we think about in the broader context that we really are, in some respects, competing for investment dollars. Our companies are owned by global infrastructure funds and global energy companies. And we look at the country and we look at where to invest in projects. And so typically larger projects, we're seeing 500 gigawatt sized projects on the mainland. And so projects here tend to be much smaller. So I think a lot of IPPs have started to look at even 10 megawatts being quite a small project, or 20 megawatts being really almost too small. And so there's a really great opportunity, though, for community solar and commercial scale developers to capitalize on that. I think if we want to open up the utility scale RFPs to those size projects, that would be great. I think there's other procurement mechanisms as well, like community CBRE and the like, that could go through major revisions to allow more projects to be successful.
Yeah, I think again, when you breach that threshold and you enter into the utility scale space, there's a lot of
pain.
There's a different contract.
You wanted to say
right?
Pain, didn't you?
There's a different contract. There's a different process for interconnection. He's putting words in my mouth, for the record. There's a lot of different considerations. So I think if I may, maybe rephrase the question, I think maybe what the question wanted to ask was, exactly, can you increase the size of CBRE projects, which have community-based renewable energy projects, which have lower thresholds for interconnection requirement studies, for bid packages, like the money, what you have to spend on getting bid ready. So I think there's a good balance in between that.
There's a question here about when projects are canceled, how much money is lost? And I think probably I will let you mull that over. Well, I think when I think about how we at Longroad approach projects, right, and I think some other companies, is the developer, right, Longroad in my case, they fund the initial development. So they fund often the land acquisition, the getting a lease, the legal costs associated with that, the initial site studies, the negotiating with Hawaiian Electric, putting the bids together, doing the initial engineering, and then, and then eventually, as I mentioned, once we get all our approvals, we go to the banks, we go to our funding partners and say, okay, we're ready to finance the project, we close our financing, and then we can start construction. But more often, because then if we waited till then to buy our transformers and our other long lead equipment, we would definitely blow our timeline, because some of those timelines are a year, 2 years, 3 years to get some of that equipment. So now before financing on our dime, development costs also include ordering some of that equipment. Usually we'll push off the panels and the big stuff, batteries and stuff, until financing, but even then, sometimes we have to make deposits. So, I guess we're talking, I'm just going to roughly, to get an order of magnitude, I think we're talking, in the 10, plus or minus 10 million, depending on the size of the project, maybe 5 million for smaller projects, maybe 20 for larger projects. But quite a bit of money goes in before you write the letter to say, I'm sorry, we have to cancel the project. So it's a lot of funding.
Yeah, and I think a related point to remember as well is that as these projects take longer to develop, they do get more expensive. So where they don't get canceled, those costs just keep mounting and getting embedded into the cost of the project and passed on in the power purchase agreement rate and to ratepayers ultimately. So what we've seen, of course, is this sort of trend of prices continuing to go up of projects that had to terminate, rebid, and the price pressure just continues. And of course gets opened up to all the uncertainty that we've been talking about on top of all of that, right? And so there's the budget pressure and the mounting costs as they go on, as well as all the uncertainty that gets opened up the longer that these projects take to get to construction.
And to be fair to everyone who had a part in the construct of this competitive bidding process and the framework and the fixed price, nature of the contracts, pricing was going down. For a time, pricing was trending down, and so it made sense. The structure made sense. It made sense to hold developers to GCODs, to financially penalize them for not making it, to hold them to the pricing. And by the way, interconnection, I would say, in the initial, tranche of projects was easier because, we chose the land that was closest to the points of interconnection. To Nicola's point, the market has changed. It's shifted. So, the solutions that we're bringing to the table, the suggestions we're bringing to the table are, hopefully just viewed as not, not being negative, but being saying okay, what does the future of contracting look like? And that is what we have right now. What we're on the precipice with the integrated grid planning, rolling RFPs. Right? We want to start off on a good foot so that we can increase the pace and get over the hump. I did want to talk kind of address the cost of one of these projects being canceled. I also want to address maybe some of the holistic things, just to foot stomp it again, in the EA kind of framework, the environmental impact or assessment framework, there's the no action alternative. What happens if nothing happens, right? And I think we've talked about this all today, right? We don't get the benefits of the fixed price nature of the renewables. We don't get the benefits of the diversification of our generation assets. We don't get the benefits of the timely closure of these older generation units that Shelley discussed this morning, and we have to put more money into keeping them running, right? So we all know why we want renewables. I think that's what we lose when green jobs, careers, those things.
Oh, okay. Another question from Douglas Adams, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, big fan. Many of these developments are addressing utility RFPs, but are being cited in local counties. What are some of the things that localities can do to support the continuation of projects?
That's a really great question. It has me sort of reflecting on some of the challenges and then solutions that we came to in addressing real property tax rates on some of our projects. We had 3 projects that have been operating for several years, and we suddenly saw an increase of about 350x on our real property tax bills.
350x.
And these projects operate under fixed budgets, fixed operating budgets. And so we really quickly sort of rallied support at the council and talked to all the county, city and county of Honolulu council members who very quickly identified that this was something we needed to address quickly. And within 3 months, we had effectively put in place. It was a temporary measure, but to treat only the area just on the piles and the pads of the project as industrial rather than the entire footprint of the panels and everything that the solar project sat on. And so that was something where we saw the county quickly come in to address that. And I think we are hoping that counties, and especially Hawaii County, continue to kind of look at that as a potential solution. And it's not that, again, these projects want to see real property tax breaks. It's that we want to see certainty. We want to know what it's going to be for 20 plus years. And so really locking in something that is reasonable, that's a great example of something we can do.
And an example from Maui, the Kahiava wind farm that was COD in 2005, I believe 2006, went online. Subsequent to that, the county changed their property tax rules to then tax the equipment. Suddenly the equipment at the wind farm was going to be taxed, which is, that's, hundreds of $millions, well, tens of millions of dollars of equipment. So that, suddenly we also received a surprise tax bill for quite a large amount. And it's the uncertainty and the changes after, the price and project, everything has been negotiated, that can really hit project economics hard. Now, you may be able to bleed that project, if the laws don't change, and have them pay, but you're going to lose developers that don't want to come into that kind of environment. So I think while in Hawaii, in the approval process, like the regulatory process that we're talking about, counties have a role not just in property tax, but in approval of permits. Conditional use permits, building permits are approved by counties. We have had generally pretty good success with counties taking a quick look at, or processing our building permits applications, conditional use permit applications pretty quickly. I think that's been our experience. I mean, they take the project seriously, they know they're important, and they move them to the top of the list, not in an inappropriate way. Not singling out any planning department, but in an appropriate way, I think they play a role in, play a role in facilitating the project in different ways.
I'm a urban planner also. I think Chair Ascension also cause, somehow a lot of us urban planners end up in the renewable energy space, and I empathize with our volunteer land use commissioners and local jurisdictional commissioners on the Planning Commission who review these highly technical, again, very, a lot of pressure to review these projects because they're, in support of statewide goals and the utilities goals. And I empathize. And, I think one example of a really kind of good effort was the Powering Past Coal Task Force that kind of provided an additional resource. It was, for those of you who don't know, there was an executive order signed by the governor upon the closure of the imminent closure of the coal facility on the island of Oahu, and there was going to be 180 megawatts of firm capacity that was lost on that island. And you saw in the slides earlier, that capacity still has not been, it's been replaced with oil. The renewable projects haven't come online as expected to replace that lost generation. And the Powering Past Coal Task Force was very, very helpful in providing, I believe, an additional supportive resource for these the Oahu specific authorities having jurisdiction to kind of just get everyone up to speed on everything that was coming down their pipeline. So shout out to those who are involved in that, and would love to see more of that collaboration happen as well.
Yeah. That was a good way to wrap it up on working together. Great wage job. Grab the theme. Any last words you'd like to share before we wrap it up?
I think maybe one thing we haven't fully touched on is just we're talking a lot about the upward price pressure that we're seeing across these projects. And again, to refer to Commissioner Asuncion's comments, we're not like in this sweet spot anymore of all these tailwinds in our direction, and we're kind of seeing a lot of headwinds. I think we really need to be mindful, again, of when we look at any one project and think about its many benefits and think about the pricing and the approval, to take a really long-term view of that and to say it's more than just a projected sort of this price against a projected avoided cost. There's a high level of uncertainty that we all currently live with in importing this amount of fossil fuels to our islands. And in comparing a price, even with these increases long-term over 20 years, we're locking in that certainty. And so I really think what we're all talking about here is to find solutions to get to that level of certainty so we can see these projects providing those benefits and taking that long-term view. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your time today, and now we can go back to despising each other.
Love you, Wren.